Now what we have built here is a simple OK model, not best of its breed, but we'll assume that this model is good enough. And let's proceed with that assumption to the next step. In the next step, we are going to save this model as a trained model. Now remember that I told you that I'm assuming that this model is good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as a trained model. And if you can see here, the way I save it, okay, by right clicking the output port of the trained model and then clicking on save as trained model. Now let's go over the interface here, and now let's click here. Now I have multiple trained models, but the one that we just saved is the one that is present here, which is called the Titanic Train Experiment Model. So let's go ahead and create a new experiment. This new experiment, what we are going to do is we are going to apply the model which we just trained and we saved as trained model on the test data to reveal the survivors and non-survivors. In order for me to do that, I'm just going to copy the entire workflow from here so that I don't have to repeat some of those things. So I'm going to say copy and I'm going to say new and I'm going to say blank experiment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Titanic test experiment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste the components here. And I'm going to save it. Let's just get that experiment saved. Now let's proceed to the next step. Now, as you can guess, we don't have any role for the Titanic train to play. Hence, we are going to search for the Titanic test. If you remember, this was one of the data sets that we had uploaded, and I'm going to grab the output of Titanic test and pass it on to the select columns. I'm going to get rid of this Titanic train. And let's see what are the components we don't really need. We definitely do not need any split data because we need to pass in the entire data set for scoring. So we are going to get rid of the split data. And we definitely do not need the two-class logistic regression here. And we definitely do not need the train model because we have already completed the train exercise. And we don't need the evaluate model as well. So we only retain the score model. Now, couple of changes. Now, if you remember that we had saved something as a trained model, and I'm going to search for the trained model, and I'm going to grab the trained model, correct? And I'm going to pass that as an input to the score model, and I'm going to pass in the input of the convert indicator values to the score model. Now, recall whatever pre-processing that we did in train has to be done for the test as well, without a doubt. So a couple of changes in the select columns in the data set. Correct? We do not have a survived label in the test data set. If you remember, the reason we do not have a survived label in the test data set is because we are looking, or our objective is to predict that particular passenger's survival, and hence survived is not a label or not a data point given in the test data set. So I'm going to remove that. I'm going to say okay. And then we are almost done. So what we are going to do is we are optionally going to have something called a convert to CSV component, which is going to help us download that particular data point as an CSV file. And we are also going to have something called select columns in the data set, correct? So just to kind of filter out the information that we need. Okay? And then in the select columns in the data set, what we are going to do is we are probably going to go with all columns at this point in time. Or okay, since we have not run the workflow, the data is yet to flow in. So I would rather not have this component at this point in time, and let me just connect it to the convert to CSV and run it as it is. And let's see what happens when we apply the model on the test data set. It is going to take a couple of seconds for the model to execute. And as you can see, that couple of steps is already being completed. The clean missing data for the age and embarked is already done. Then the next part is converting the gender and embarked to categorical data. And then we convert them into indicator values. And then we finally pass the data set to the score model. Apply the trained model. Remember, it's the trained model there. And there it is done. So let's just go ahead and see for ourselves in terms of what are the predictions. So for example, in the case of passenger 892, it has been predicted that the passenger is going to be dead. Or in the case of 896, our model determines that the passenger is going to survive. So out of about 418 data points, out of 418 data points, we are predicting almost 38% of the passengers to survive. Now, the simple rule for the score probability is any value above zero point 0.5 is going to be marked as survived, and any value below 0.5 is going to be marked as dead. And you could vary the threshold. It's not that you need to stick to the 0.5, but globally that is the accepted threshold. Now we are almost done with our test experiment, wherein we have passed in the test data set and we have determined their probabilities of survival. But what we do not know yet is how we have fared. We do not know the actual stats. In order for us to do that, let's grab a component called the select columns in the data set, and let's pass that as an output, as an input, the output from the score model to select columns, and let's pass in the output of the select columns to convert to CSV. And in the select columns, what we are just interested in is passenger ID and scored labels. Now, this is what Kaggle is expecting you to upload to verify how good your model is. So, I'm going to rerun this entire thing. So typically, if a certain component has not been changed, it is not going to be rerun. So we wouldn't have to spend too much of time waiting. As you can see, this time the rerun was much faster. Correct. And then now if you were to download this file as convert to CSV, and let's say download, you would see that I have already downloaded a particular file, and let me open it. So what we have is passenger ID and scored labels, and just you mark the scored labels as survived and upload the CSV file onto the Kaggle environment. If you see here, there is something called a my submission page or submit predictions. And typically when you are submitting your predictions, you have to submit the format along the format that Kaggle is prescribed. So your submission rule is very simple. You have to submit the passenger ID and the survived label. And once you're ready with your file, you can upload your file here, and then you will understand where you are there on your leaderboard. And that will reflect your correctness of your experiment.